Good morning. We are glad that you are here. If you are new, welcome. There is a place for you here.
At Woods Chapel Church, we are one church with 3 different campuses.
In Lee Summit,
in Raytown,
And here in Blue Springs.
We are a group of people doing our best to love God and those around us.
Our vision is to build transforming communities where everyone is included, accepted, and loved.
All of us are on a journey.
this is a place where you can ask difficult questions about faith and life.
We are here to help and support each other.
thanks for joining us.
No matter who you are or where you're from, we want you to know that you are welcome.
Well, good morning and welcome. My name is Abby, and I'm so glad that you all have joined us for worship this morning. We want to hear from you, so let us know where you're watching from and how your week's been. And if you're new, type the word new so we know that you're here. This is a time where we can just take a breath and let it out. If this week has been crazy, or if it has been a good week, even more so to come together and give thanks to God. But just let this be a time where we can be in His presence. Let's go to God in prayer. Father God, we just come to you giving thanks. We thank you so much for your love, that it's unconditional, and God, that we know we don't deserve it, but we thank you so much for it. God, we just ask that as we go through this time of worship, that you can grow our hearts closer to yours. God, that you can help us be united with you and see things the way that you see them. God, help us to see others the way you see us. We love you so much, and God, we thank you for this glorious day and the life that you give us. It's all in your name. Amen. Call me a citizen of heaven.
morning. My name is Michael Scott, and I'm the pastor here at Wood Chapel Blue Springs. And I want to thank you for joining us. Now, we are in week 2 of the series called All Roads Lead to Rome. And we're talking about pathways. We're talking about ways in which we can connect with God and connect with each other. And what is it, the path that we're on, that does that accomplishes that? Now, I love road trips. And so when I think of roads or all roads lead to Rome, I think of trips that my family and I have taken. And every summer, my family and I, we get together and we rent a minivan. And this year there's 7 of us. And so this next week, we're getting a minivan and we're driving to Myrtle Beach. And we're going to spend a week on the beach and it's going to be great. And I'm hopeful that I don't have to do anything that week but get up, eat, sit on a beach, go home, and repeat. So we do this every summer though, and we make a trip out of it. We don't fly, there's 7 of us, so it's too expensive to fly back and forth. And if I flew it, I'd have to rent a car anyway. So we get in the car and we make a trip out of it. Now, how many of you, like, did you grow up doing this? I had a station wagon growing up, and we always took road trips. So how many of you like to go and to do these? Maybe they're just weekend trips. Maybe you're a weekend warrior. But I want you to think about that road trip, because just a couple years ago, we got up, and I like to get everybody up early in the morning, and we get packed sometimes the night before so we can just get up and leave. And here's my goal. So we always leave on a Friday, and we have some condo or we're at a resort somewhere, but we can't check in until Saturday till like 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And so, but we get up on Friday and we leave Friday morning, and Gulf Shores was like 22 hours, right? So it turns into it's a full day. And we left at like 7 o'clock in the morning, and the goal was to drive all night long, maybe stop and maybe, I don't know, have dinner somewhere, explore a few little towns as we're driving through. But the goal was to get to the beach by the next morning so we get a whole extra day at the beach, right? Even before we check into our hotel or to our condo. And so we're doing this. We're driving down, we're in the minivan, we're cruising along, and we get to about 3 o'clock in the morning. And my wife's like, I can't drive anymore, because we kind of take shifts, about 2 or 3 hour shifts. I was like, we're close. We're going to be there in just a few hours. And so I took over. And so I get in the driver's seat, and we have our phones, and of course they all have GPS systems in them, and you just punch, the address in, and we're just cruising along, and I'm just following where the phone takes me. And I get to this point, and it's 3 o'clock in the morning, right? So it's pitch black. There's what I think is nobody around, and I come up on a line of cars. And now some kind of wreck has happened up ahead of us. And they were asking people to get off of the highway. They're going to detour us. And so I get off the highway, and they were directing us, and it's dark. I'm in some strange town. And if you've ever been by the ocean, so we're down in Gulf Shores, Alabama, the Gulf of Mexico, right next to Florida. Most of these places, like, your cell phone doesn't work great. So I get off of the highway, and we're supposed to be finding our way around. I get lost. I don't know where I'm at, and my GPS isn't working, right? Searching for signal, searching for signal, searching for signal. And everybody's asleep, and I'm like, oh no, I've gotten us lost. Eventually, I found my way back to the highway. I found my way back to a convenience store where I went and asked the clerk, where do I need to go? And eventually, I got cell service again, and my GPS started working again. And it was awesome, because we got there a little bit early, so I pulled into a parking lot, we waited on the beach, and we were able to sit on the beach as the sun came up. Now, without my GPS, I would have been completely lost, right? And when I didn't have that GPS, when it wasn't working, when I wasn't paying attention to it, I deviated. I ended up on a detour. And I think it's easy for us in our life to get caught up on detours. And this is kind of why we're talking about all roads lead to Rome. When we're on a certain path, and I challenged you last week to be on a path. And last week we talked about how to even start on a path, we have to realize that we do things that are selfish, that are in our best interest, and not of the best interest of our friends and our family and our loved ones, or really anybody around us. And so I challenged you. I said, take a hard look at your life, right? And of course, during this, we've also been reading scriptures from Romans. Romans is this book written by Paul. Paul was a church planter, just went from town to town to town, house to house to house, city to city to city. And he started churches. He just got groups of people together, and he would preach and he would talk and he'd say, listen, now go be on this path of helping people, of loving people, of including people. And then as he left and went to the next town, he would write letters. And one of those letters was to a group of people in Rome. And we call it the book of Romans. And we're taking that book And we're reading scriptures from it, specifically written by Paul, and we're talking about how does this apply to our life? How does this apply to our journey? How does this help us on a pathway? Because I believe as Christians, we are all on a pathway. Our job is that we love God and we love others. Jesus gave us that task. That's the most important thing that we could possibly do. And if we're doing that, I believe that's a journey. And what my journey looks like is different than what your journey looks like. And so I use language like who God is to you is different than who God is to me. And what your journey is going to be different. It's going to have different outcomes. It's going to have different things that you do on your journey. But it is important that we are on a journey and that we have a sole focus on loving God and loving others. And that journey should lead us to God and back into community, like all roads lead to Rome, right? Back to the heart of what's important. And so last week I said, in order to start that journey, we have to ask ourselves very difficult questions. Questions like, are we being the best people we can be? Now, Paul addresses this, and he says, he struggles with sin. He says he's a slave to sin. And really what he's saying is he struggles with his own selfishness. He struggles with making decisions that will benefit and bless those around him. Instead, he makes decisions that only benefit him, that only do things that make him feel better about himself, instead of building up communities, instead of loving those around him. And Paul challenges us to be on a journey back to the core of who we are, a journey back to God and back to each other. And that starts with saying, can I be a better person? Are there sins? Is there selfishness in my life that I can remove? And that's the very first step. And I asked you to look in the mirror last week and ask yourself those difficult questions. That's what I asked of you. And I hope that you asked yourself those questions. I hope that you said, you know what, there's something I'm struggling with. And this thing distracts me. It sends me on a detour from the path that I need to be on. The path of God, the path of community, of inclusivity, of generosity, whatever that path looks like for you. When we sin, when we make selfish decisions, it takes us off on a detour, much like my detour when I got lost. And often when we find ourselves lost, we struggle. And then what happens, I believe what happens is we then sin more. We're even more selfish when we find ourselves off that path. And now here's what I believe. I believe that there is a GPS guidance system built in each and every single one of us. That there is something that connects us with God and connects us with each other. That there's this internal compass that leads us back to God and back to one another. Call it GPS, call it the Holy Spirit, call it spirituality. But there's something that connects us. There's something more than just a tangible world that is happening all around us. There's a quote. Now, I'm a big Rob Bell fan. Rob Bell uses language like, everything is spiritual. And if you ever get a chance, go read Rob Bell or go watch he has a movie or a TV show or something where he went around into these presentations and literally the catchphrase was everything is spiritual. And he takes you through this journey where he talks about, the origins of the earth and how, the universe has evolved over 13 billion years. And humans have only been a part of that world for just a few brief moments in time in the span of the universe. And he says there's this progression of humanity and there's this progression of the universe. And he says at the heart of that, at the core of that, there's some kind of connectedness. There's something more to it than we're just here to live a life. There's meaning and there's purpose. And that we find meaning and purpose in these old rooted texts that we call the Bible that speak to us. That tell us crazy stories that almost seem unbelievable. And some of them, maybe they are unbelievable. But yet they're stories that speak to our heart and speak to our core of who we are. They're stories that help us to remain on a pathway back to God and back to each other. And so what Rob Bell would say is that everything is spiritual. There's Pierre de Chardin says this about spirituality. I love this. I wrote this quote down. He says, we are not human beings having a spiritual experience. He says we are spiritual beings having a human experience. Now, I grew up in a church where we talked about our spiritual lives all the time. And we separated the two. We had our everyday life and then we had our spiritual life. And often that spiritual life only consisted of going to church on Sundays and maybe a prayer service or a gathering on a Wednesday. And that when we talked about our spiritual life, it was this abstract thing that was removed from the rest of our life. Now, I don't necessarily know if I like that language. What I would say is I would agree with Rob Bell. Everything that we are is spiritual. Everything that we do is spiritual in nature because it has a purpose. It has a why. And so I would say that we are on a spiritual journey, but I don't even need to define that with spiritual. I would just say that we're on a journey and that we are on that journey together. And like I said at the beginning, my journey is going to look different than your journey. And I believe it's important that we are aware of that we should be on a journey, and that we are doing and participating in things that keep us on that journey, that keep that focus on good, on God, and aimed back at each other for the good of all. And it's often that we get distracted. Sin, the word harmatia, means to miss the mark. We talked about that last week. And we do things that distract us from where we're trying to go or where we should be trying to get to. And so today I'm going to read from Romans again. Now, Paul, we read from the 7th chapter last week where Paul's like, I'm a slave to sin. I struggle with sin. And again, we're going to read from chapter 8 this week. And he's going to talk a lot about those same things, about how he struggles with sin. But Paul talks to us and he separates the tangible or the human experience from the spiritual or a spirit experience. Now he does that because I think it's not defines who we are as creation, right? As created beings. But I think he does this to try to prove a point that in our spiritual life that we need to be intentional about taking steps towards being on that journey and on a good and healthy journey. So if you're reading with me, I'm reading from Romans 8, and I'm starting with verse 5, and I'll wait my way down through 16. So Paul says this. He says, those who live following their sinful selves only think about things that their sinful selves want, right? So this is kind of like last week. When you are in that place, when you find yourself being selfish, like that just leads to more selfishness. Just like I believe that when we do good things, that leads to more goodness. Martin Luther King Jr. said that you don't fight evil with evil, you fight evil with good. Darkness can't drive out darkness, only light can drive out darkness. This is the same thing. When we find ourselves struggling, when we're being selfish, that just begats usually more selfishness and sin. He says, but those who live following the Spirit are thinking about the things that the Spirit wants them to do. So here he introduces this idea of a spirit, that there's something more going on within us, that we're not just flesh and bone, that we have a purpose, that we have a why, that the reason we exist is to connect with God and to connect with each other, to live life, to have existence, to experience pleasure, to experience joy, and to be there for one another. He said, if a person's thinking is controlled by his sinful self, then there is death, right? We know from other scripture that Paul talks about that the wages of sin are death, that when we do unhealthy things, that we die a little inside. That's what Paul's saying. But if his thinking is controlled by the Spirit, then there is life and peace. Paul's saying when we participate in spiritual things or connect with that which is holy, do things that are helpful for all, that there's life in that and there's peace to be found in that. He said this is true because if a person's thinking is controlled by his sinful self, then he is against God. He refuses to obey God's law. And really, he is not able to obey God's law. Those people are ruled by their sinful selves, and they cannot please God. He says, but you are not ruled by your sinful selves. I like that. He says, you are ruled by the Spirit. If that Spirit of God really lives within you. But if anyone does not have the Spirit of Christ, and he does not belong to Christ, your body will always be dead because of sin. But if Christ is in you, then the Spirit gives you life. Paul's saying that our purpose resides in the Spirit on this journey given to us by God. He said, so my brothers, and we can say and sisters, right? So my brothers and sisters, we must not be ruled by our sinful selves. We must not live the way our sinful selves want. If you use yourselves to do the wrong things your sinful selves want, then you will die spiritually. So he goes back to this idea that when we're selfish and we sin, that we die a little bit each time. And that when we do that, it just encourages more sin, more selfishness down that pathway, the pathway that we shouldn't be on, right? He says, but if you use the Spirit's help to stop doing the wrong things you do with your body, then you will have true life. He said, the true children of God are those who let God's Spirit lead them. The spirit that we receive is not the spirit that makes us slaves again to fear. I like that line. I'm going to read that again. The spirit that we have received is not a spirit that makes us slaves again to fear. The spirit that makes us the children of God, and with that spirit we say, Father, dear Father, and the Spirit himself joins with our spirit to say that we are God's children. Paul makes this distinction between our humanity and our spirituality. And this morning I want to talk about that. I want to use that same language because I think if we can separate, now that's kind of thinking in binary terms or dualistic type of thinking, which I don't normally like to do. But for this case, I think it's a good analogy. Because in our humanity, in our tangible life, in the concrete of life, we have plans for everything and we have paths for everything. I mean, how many of you have had a career coach? Or how many of you had a counselor in high school or college? I mean, they have career coaches now. I mean, there's life coaches. There's a whole industry on this. Just the other day, I'm a part of the Blue Springs Chamber, and somebody joined the chamber that is a spiritual coach. And I'm like, but isn't that what pastors do? But I love the idea. In life, we have a plan. We have a plan for retirement. We have a career path. Yet, when we talk about our spirituality or our spiritual life, we don't often talk about plans or journeys or pathways. I think spirituality has been boiled down to, yeah, maybe I go to church on Sundays, or maybe I listen in to a sermon, or maybe I read something on occasion. If we believe that quote that we are spiritual beings having a human experience, not human beings having a spiritual experience, then I think our spiritual journey is the most important one. And that we take time to maybe intentionally continue down that journey to do things that help us along on that journey to change us, to make us better people, to make our communities better. And I think often we don't even think of it in those terms. When I was in the corporate world, and I spent years and years and years working for different companies, but specifically the last company I was with before I became a pastor about 6 years ago, when I started I was in my 20s. And I was the new up-and-comer, and they had me on the management track. And I was issued a coach. Now, my coach, he was amazing. His name was Cliff. And Cliff worked for PepsiCo. And of course, PepsiCo used to be one of the largest organizations in the world. They owned Frito-Lay and like Taco Bell, KFC, Pizza. They owned all these things, right? And he was one of their upper execs, and he'd been retired for years, and he spent his time investing in new young managers at our company. And Cliff would sit down with me, and we would talk about my goals, and he would listen to my conversations, and he would give me feedback, and he would give me pointers. He would give me opportunity to grow in my career and grow as a person and as a manager. And so we had actual documented processes and things that I would do and opportunities that I took advantage of to grow in my career, to grow in my management. This morning I want to give you some courage work, and I want to challenge you. Last week I invited you to take a look at your life and maybe some struggles and some things that are going on that maybe you could remove from your life. Today I want to invite you into the next step in that journey, because I do believe that is the first step, to realize that we do things that aren't helpful, that our default is going to be make a decision for ourselves and to sin and not to include others, or to make decisions that's for the benefit of all. But I believe the second part of that process is that we acknowledge that we need to be on some sort of journey. And if you want to call that a spiritual journey, then today we'll call it a spiritual journey. But that we should be on that journey, and that we should be on that journey together. And that journey starts, like I said last week, with self-awareness, of realizing who we are. Just like my coach did with me, realizing that what maybe our strengths are, maybe things that we are good at, maybe things that we're not so good at. And that we look at our life and say, you know what, there are intentional things I want to do in my life to be a more spiritually connected person to God and to those around me. But we must take steps to do that. So this morning, I'm inviting you to be a part of a group. We're calling them table groups, where we get together and we try to, now I'm not sure we can actually map out what everybody's journey looks like, because I think life is about the journey, not about mapping it out and trying to control it. But I do believe there are steps we can take along that journey to keep us guided towards a common goal, towards a common good. And this morning, if you're more interested about that, if you want to hear about it, if you want to do something, if you want to make life change, if you say, I've been going to church for years, Mike, and I don't know what my next steps are. Mike, I've been a Christian my whole life, but I feel dead on the inside right now. Mike, I want to be a better person. I believe that that is an invitation to be on a spiritual journey. And the goal of the church, the goal of our community here at Wood Chapel Blue Springs, is to assist you on that journey. And so today I'm opening that invitation. If you want to be a part of a table group that I myself will lead, where we talk about what a spiritual journey looks like. How can we be on that journey? How can we have a common goal towards God and towards each other's? I want you to do one of two things. You can either comment in the feed this morning, or you can send me, myself or Amy Bartlett, an email. And if you do one of those two things, we will get back with you in the next few weeks, and we'll be starting these groups where we look at our lives, and we at least have some kind of process or a step or a plan of what it looks like to be on this spiritual journey together. Now, in the next few weeks to come, here in a few weeks, Amy and Kelsey are going to be talking about opportunities in which we can do this. Now, we do a lot of stuff in our community, and sometimes, like, we're feeding children this summer thousands of meals. We send them back snacks. We have a community garden that produces thousands of pounds of produce. We have all these things, and Amy will talk about this. But those things aren't the end goal. Like, we don't exist as a community just to do those things. Those things are the tools in which we use to build relationships to keep us on that journey. I believe when we are acting and participating in those things, that it helps to keep us aligned with the journey. It's a reminder. And it allows us, when we're serving somebody, whether that's a meal or whether that's helping somebody through a difficult time in their relationship with a child or a loved one, that when we see that, when we help other people, we are aware of the immense need that is all around us. And that our spirituality isn't just tied to a Sunday morning. It's not just tied to a church service. It's not just tied to a church. That our spirituality, that who we are to our core, is something that we improve on every day because it's innate. It's who we are in everything that we do. And that if we have common goals and a common thread, and if inside of us, there's something inside of us, some kind of thing that's pulling at us. Call it a GPS, call it guidance, call it the Holy Spirit. That we can become more aware of that. That we can become more in tune with that. And that we can be on a true spiritual journey. As you think on those things, as you send us emails or just type in into this premiere this morning, as you think on those things, I ask that you pray with me now. God, we are so thankful for the opportunity to be on this journey together. God, help us to see that there are intentional steps that we can take, God, to help stay on that journey, and that there is an immense need in our life to be aware of that journey. God, help us to remain on that path. And God, when we veer, when we take those detours, God, help us to remember that within each of us is a guidance system that you gave us, that we were created with, that connects us to you. God, help us to find our way back to that. God, sometimes we just need that every day. Every single day we need help with that. And I just pray that you would help us to all be on that journey. God, help us to recognize that our journeys may look different, but they all have the same common goal. And they all lead back to you. God, we thank you for these opportunities. And we pray these things in your name. Amen.
Great unknown, the feet made fair. fountain, deepest waters, your sovereign hand will be my guide. My feet may fail and fear surrounds me. You never fail, and you won't start now. And I will call upon your name and keep my eyes above the waves. When oceans rise, my soul will rest in your embrace. For I am yours, and you are mine. Spirit, lead me where my trust is without borders. Let me walk upon the waters wherever you would call me. And take me deeper than my feet could ever wander, and my faith will be made stronger in the presence of my Savior. Spirit, lead me where my trust is without borders. Let me walk upon the waters wherever you would call me. Take me deeper than my feet could ever wander, and my faith will be made stronger in the presence of my Savior. Spirit, lead me where my trust is without borders. Let me walk upon the waters wherever you would call me. And take me deeper than my feet could ever wander, and my faith will be made stronger in the presence of my Savior. And I will call upon your name and keep my eyes above the waves. When oceans rise, my soul will rest in your embrace. For I am yours, and you are mine.
Today I invite you to be on a spiritual journey, and that we are on that spiritual journey together. And if that's something that you are interested in or want to further or take a next step, I just ask that you reach out and you let us know, and we'd be more than happy to help you in that journey. Have a great day and a week. Go in peace.